Long before we gave things names, we gave them meaning. Not because we understood them, but because we didn't. Before we could tame fire or track the stars, we watched and we guessed. We saw the wind bend trees and thought it might be alive. We saw lightning fall from the sky and thought something must have thrown it. We buried our dead with tools, with charms, with food, as if they might still need them somewhere else. That was magic, not illusions, not trickery, just the instinct to imagine a world behind this one, to see a pattern where none existed, to sense intention in the storm, the river, the sky. The first spell may have been a mother humming to calm her child's fever. The first ritual could have been the hunter's quiet prayer before a dangerous kill. The first curse might have been no more than a whispered name in anger and the fear that someone, something, was listening. We were not fools. We were uncertain, and in uncertainty we filled the gaps with stories. Magic didn't begin in towers or temples. It began in darkness, in fear and awe. It began when we decided the unknown wasn't empty, but full of meaning. And meaning needs structure. So we created patterns. We gave the world invisible rules and believed that if we followed them, it might treat us kindly. That belief became rhythm, rhythm became ritual, and ritual became culture. Across the globe, in caves and forests and open plains, our ancestors started whispering to things they couldn't see, to the sun, the sky, the bones of their ancestors, to stones, to fire, to wind, anything that seemed to hold power. They left offerings by trees, painted animals onto rock walls, banged drums, burned herbs, sang, danced, waited. And if the animals returned the next day, was it just chance, or had the ritual worked? This was magic as survival, not power for its own sake, but power in service of living another day, of easing pain, of bringing rain, of understanding death, and always of making the world just a little less silent. So when you hear the word magic now, try to forget the sparkle, the wand, the wizard. Think instead of a mother whispering to the trees, a man placing feathers in a circle, a group of strangers chanting into the dark. Not because they knew it would work, but because they hoped it would. Close your eyes and step backwards through time. Past skyscrapers, past swords and scrolls, past even the first fires built with flint. You're standing in a forest no one has ever named. The sky is vast, the air cold, and the darkness has no rules. You are one of a few hundred humans alive. The wolves are watching, and somewhere in the night, something bigger moves. You don't know the word magic, but you feel it in everything, in the crackle of fire, in the rhythmic heartbeat of drum skins stretched over bone, in the way the wind sometimes changes direction when you sing. It's not about belief, it's about intention. You scatter ashes in a circle before a hunt, not because it's logical, but because the last time you did it, the deer came back. Coincidence? Maybe. But in a world where nothing is certain, intention is power. The rituals begin to form. Small things at first, a certain way of arranging stones, a chant before childbirth, a mask worn when the moon is full. Every gesture, every sound, becomes a negotiation with the unknown. And then one day, someone gets sick, their breath is shallow, their skin hot. You bring them herbs, water, fire, but it isn't working. So one person, quiet, older, always watching, walks away. They take a feather, a carved bone, they hum a tune no one's heard before, and they come back, changed. The sickness lifts, and from that day on people look at them differently. They're not just one of the group anymore. They've spoken with something. They've reached across the veil and brought something back. That's the shaman, not a title, not a job. A role that emerges naturally in almost every early human society, not chosen by others, chosen by experience, by dreams, by visions. Across Siberia, Central Asia and the Arctic Circle, these spirit journeyers entered trances using drums, smoke, and isolation. They'd descend into darkness, sometimes for days, and return with stories of what they'd seen. In the Amazon, it was ayahuasca and vine chants. In Australia, it was songlines and dream walking. In the plains of North America, it was sweat lodges and fasting. Different names, different tools, but the same role, to move between worlds. The world we can see, the world of trees and fire and rain, was only half the picture. The other half was invisible, the spirit world, and the shaman walked its path like a hunter follows tracks. They spoke to ancestors, argued with winds, brought back answers, warnings, cures. Sometimes they disappeared into trance and came back with a new name. Sometimes they danced in silence and called down the rain. And no one dared to ask how, only that it worked. Tools became sacred. Feathers weren't decoration, they were keys. Bones weren't just bones, they were memory. Drums weren't just sound, they were transport. The earliest magical symbols, spirals, zigzags, animal shapes, appear again and again across early human settlements. In Africa, in Europe, in Asia, in the Americas. Thousands of years apart, and yet the same patterns. Why? Maybe because the stories were already old by the time we learned to write. Maybe because we all started with the same dreams. To early humans, there was no strict boundary between physical and spiritual. The river had moods, the mountain had a voice, the sky had rules, hidden but waiting to be heard. Magic wasn't just a system, it was the worldview. Everything could be sacred if treated the right way. A leaf, a circle of stones, a breath of air. This wasn't fantasy, this was survival. You needed protection from disease. You needed to know where the animals would migrate. You needed to understand why people died and where they went. If no one could explain it, then someone had to feel it. And the people who felt it most deeply became the first magicians. Not spellcasters, not illusionists, but people who lived in both worlds and carried the weight of that bridge. They didn't always return unchanged. Some went mad, some went blind. Some were feared as much as they were loved, but they were needed. And in a world without books or medicine or science, they were the ones who could still speak to the wind. As humans settled, magic evolved. No longer whispered under stars or sung beside fires, it was carved onto stone, inscribed onto clay, written with tools so permanent they would outlast the cities themselves. When we began to write, we didn't write shopping lists. We wrote prayers, spells, names of gods, because the written word was the first spell we could cast again and again. In the land between two rivers, Mesopotamia, scribes etched tablets with stories of gods, monsters, and cosmic order. Magic here wasn't wild or chaotic. It was structured, bureaucratic. You could consult a priest-magician or a shipu who specialized in banishing demons, cleansing curses, or interpreting omens in sheep livers. It sounds strange now, but consider it. You live in a city of tens of thousands. You don't understand disease, earthquakes, crop failure. But your neighbor consults a ritualist, and that ritualist has a clay tablet that says, "When the sky is red and the goat gives birth early, beware floods." It feels like knowledge, because it is. Even if wrapped in symbol, it gives you a foothold in chaos. Magic here becomes system, a language, a set of cosmic laws deciphered through astrology, sacrifice, and sacred geometry. And if you know those laws, you're not just surviving, you're guiding fate. In Egypt, magic had another name, Heka. It wasn't a trick or an illusion. It was a divine force, a creative power. The gods themselves used it to speak the world into being. According to myth, the god Ta imagined the universe and brought it into form by speaking its name. Creation was literally an act of magical speech. To name something was to summon it. To write that name down, even more powerful. That's why Egyptian tombs are covered in writing, not to inform, but to protect. The Book of the Dead wasn't a single book, but a tradition, spells, poems, hymns, instructions. A guidebook for the soul, to help it navigate the underworld. It told you what to say when your heart was weighed against the feather of Ma'at. It told you how to avoid being devoured by the crocodile-headed demon Amit. It told you how to recognize your own name and remember who you were. Think about that. In death, your greatest threat wasn't fire or beasts. It was forgetting. And magic was memory made permanent. The priest-magicians of Egypt weren't outcasts or fringe figures. They were embedded in the highest institutions, temples, courts, even royal families. To command Heka was to participate in the eternal maintenance of the world. The sun rose each day not because it must, but because spells were spoken to call it forth. This is the shift. Magic becomes not just survival, but responsibility. And only the initiated, those who learned the secret names, the correct gestures, the ancient symbols, could participate. Which leads us to something deeper. Magic becomes restricted. In prehistory, anyone could chant to the sky, but in ancient civilizations, only some could read, only some could perform the rites. Power becomes knowledge, and knowledge becomes guarded. In the Indus Valley, one of the oldest urban cultures, we find seals and symbols still undeciphered, but they repeat, slowly, circles, horned creatures, trees, a script of mystery tightly linked to ritual. And though we don't know their words, we know this. They built ritual baths, organized sacred spaces, aligned buildings to celestial points. Magic was not background noise, it was the architecture of life. In ancient China, this became even more formalized. The shamans became court astrologers, spirit mediums, dream interpreters. Taoist sages pursued immortality through breath control, herbs, and talismans. Magic wasn't just about calling rain. It was about balancing the forces of yin and yang, moving energy through the body, writing characters that shaped reality. It's easy to call it superstition, but in truth, it was a framework, a way to see harmony in motion, to believe that you could align with nature, not bend it, not dominate it, but flow with it. All across the ancient world we see the same core idea emerge, that the universe has rules, and those rules might be hidden, optimistic, but not unreachable. And if you learn the right name, the right shape, the right time of day to speak, then the world will listen. That is civilization's magic, order pulled from mystery, the sacred made systematic, the unknown given rhythm. As cities rose and empires formed, another kind of power emerged, the power of reason. Not the end of magic, but a different way of asking the same questions. In the ancient Mediterranean, people began to wonder not just what worked, but why it worked. They weren't satisfied with ritual alone. They sought principles, logic, laws, beneath the chaos. Let's begin in Greece. Here, thinkers began to draw lines between the seen and the unseen, between what can be measured and what must be imagined. Thales of Miletus looked at the cosmos and said, "Everything is made of water." It sounds like nonsense now, but it was a radical shift, because he wasn't invoking gods, he was proposing a unifying principle. The world was no longer just enchanted, it was knowable. Pythagoras, the mathematician mystic, believed numbers had divine power. He spoke of harmony between the planets, the music of the spheres. For him, the universe was not just designed, it was measured into being. But even here, philosophy and magic blurred. The Orphic Mysteries, an esoteric religious movement, taught that the soul was divine, trapped in the body, and that through purification, ritual, and secret knowledge it could return to the stars. They used symbols, songs, sacred texts. Their rites were whispered in dark rooms, passed from one initiate to another, not unlike a school of magic. Socrates too spoke of his daimonion, a kind of inner voice, a spiritual warning system that guided him, not reason, not emotion, something else. Plato believed in forms, perfect, invisible versions of all things, a table, a tree, a human, all imperfect reflections of an eternal idea. To him, the physical world was a shadow. Real truth lived elsewhere, unseen, untouched, perhaps magical. In this world, learning was not just gaining facts, it was remembering truths your soul already knew. Magic becomes introspective. But not everyone embraced the mystical. Aristotle rejected the idea of hidden worlds. He believed in observation, logic, natural causes. Where Plato saw a realm of forms, Aristotle saw form in nature. This is where the tension begins. Magic, as practiced ritual and belief, began to be seen as irrational, as primitive, as outdated. But it didn't disappear, it adapted. In Rome, this tension deepened. Roman religion was deeply ritualized. Spells, sacrifices, invocations, all woven into civic life. Augurs read the flight of birds, priests maintained sacred fire, the Vestal virgins guarded divine flame for over 1,000 years. And yet, magic done outside the sanctioned priesthood, forbidden, sorcery, necromancy, punishable by exile or death. Why? Because magic meant private power. It wasn't that people stopped believing, it's that they feared belief in the wrong hands. Magic had become political. If the emperor's astrologer said Mars was in the wrong place, that could mean bad harvests, war, rebellion. And so astrology, divination, and ritual were tightly regulated. Still, magic survived in dreams and whispers and mystery cults. The cult of Isis, imported from Egypt, promised personal transformation through secret rites. The Mithraic mysteries, beloved by Roman soldiers, offered a cosmic battle between light and darkness, hidden in underground temples behind locked doors. The deeper the empire spread, the more hungry people became for something sacred but personal. And far to the east, in early China, a parallel development was unfolding. Like Greece, China had its philosophers, and like Rome, it had its rituals. But where the West often drew a hard line between magic and reason, China did something else entirely. It harmonized them. Confucius, the great teacher, didn't speak of spirits much. He focused on ethics, family, duty. But even he insisted that ancient rituals had power, if not to summon gods, then to create order. Taoism, on the other hand, embraced the mystical. Tao, the way, is not a god. It is the flow of all things, invisible, inescapable, eternal. And Taoist sages taught that by understanding this flow, by breathing with it, moving with it, thinking with it, you could align your spirit with the cosmos. They used talismans, wrote magical characters on silk, built internal energy through meditation, swallowed mercury in the hope of eternal life. They weren't fools. They were experimenting with transformation, with death, with time itself. In both East and West, magic was shifting, not fading, changing shape. It moved from forests to courts, from chants to manuscripts, from instinct to idea. Magic had entered the mind, and in doing so, it became harder to define, but no less real. By the time Europe entered the medieval period, magic had become a double-edged thing. It wasn't forgotten, it was everywhere, but now it wore a cloak. No longer danced in open fields or carved into temple walls. Magic had gone into hiding, into pages, into whispers, into shadow. This was the era of the grimoire, books of spells, sigils, and secret rites. They weren't dusty tomes kept in libraries. They were dangerous things, objects of fear, often locked away, buried, or burned. Because to write magic was to claim control, to possess it. And that, in the eyes of the church and king, was no longer mysticism, it was threat. In medieval Christian Europe, there was a deep tension. The Bible described a world full of miracles, angels, demons, and divine intervention. But the institutional church insisted that only God or his sanctioned agents could wield that power, which meant that anyone else, any herbalist, midwife, stargazer, or wanderer with a book of strange symbols, was at risk. Magic hadn't died, but it had been renamed heresy, witchcraft, devilry. Still, the books were written. The Key of Solomon, one of the most famous grimoires, claimed to be penned by the ancient king himself. It contained instructions for summoning spirits, creating protective circles and invoking angels for wisdom and power. You had to bathe, fast, draw exact diagrams, use specific metals and moon phases. Even the ink had to be sacred, made from ghoul nuts and iron salts, because every detail mattered. Every symbol was a doorway, every word a lever. Another text, the Sworn Book of Honorius, was said to be written by a mysterious figure who claimed divine revelation. It taught how to contact God, command angels, and, if you weren't careful, fall into the hands of demons. Many of these books weren't just spiritual tools, they were technologies. They treated the invisible world like a machine. If you pulled the right levers, said the right names, used the right timing, you could change reality. It's tempting to see this as madness, but think about what these books meant to their owners. In a world where the church held total authority, where disease, famine, and war were seen as divine punishments, the grimoire was a private key, a way of saying, I can speak to the world myself. I can know the names of things. I don't have to wait for permission. Not all magic was dark. Some spells were for healing, to protect crops, to ward off plague. Some were prayers dressed in symbols. Some were medicine wrapped in myth. But the fear remained, and the more the church tightened its grip, the more dangerous magic became, not because it was evil, but because it was outside control. Meanwhile, in the Islamic world, something different was happening. From the 8th to 13th centuries, during the Islamic Golden Age, cities like Baghdad, Cairo, and Cordoba flourished. Science, philosophy, and magic weren't rivals, they were companions. Alchemy, astrology, and occult medicine were studied alongside geometry and medicine. Scholars translated ancient Greek and Persian texts, preserving and expanding knowledge lost elsewhere. One of the most influential texts of the time was the Picatrix, a massive Arabic grimoire that blended astrology, magic, philosophy, and metaphysics. It was dense, complex, arcane, filled with planetary alignments, talismanic rituals, and recipes for summoning spiritual forces. But it wasn't seen as evil. It was seen as a science of the unseen, a way to understand the divine order. Where Europe saw devils, many Islamic scholars saw intelligences, spirits not of hell, but of starlight, beings that could be reasoned with if approached with knowledge and purity. Of course, not everyone approved. There were debates, censures, warnings against forbidden knowledge. But magic in the Islamic world was not entirely underground. It had scholars, systems, debates. And in this contrast we see something powerful. Magic survives best when it is allowed to breathe. Where it's repressed, it curdles. It becomes dark, fearful, secretive. But where it's studied, challenged, refined, it becomes language, a lens, a way of seeing. Back in Europe, the fear continued to rise. Books were copied in secret, symbols passed between hands, and every now and then someone was caught. A book was burned, a woman hanged, a name erased, but the spells never truly vanished. They hid in margins, in lullabies, and strange phrases scratched into doorways. Magic had gone underground, but it was learning new ways to survive. Magic, once a sacred dialogue between humans and the world, had become dangerous. Not because it had changed, but because society had. The 15th century in Europe was a time of transformation. New technologies, new wars, new diseases. and beneath it all a creeping fear that something unseen was working against the divine order. That fear needed a face, and it found one, not in scholars or kings, but in women. This was the beginning of the witch hunts. It wasn't just superstition, it was a system. One that turned midwives into murderers, herbalists into heretics, widows into servants of Satan. The Malleus Maleficarum, published in 1487 by 2 inquisitors, was the match that lit the continent on fire. Its name means the hammer of witches, and it told people how to identify, interrogate, and execute them. It described women as more susceptible to the devil. It warned that they could fly, curse crops, steal male potency, and turn into wolves under a blood moon, and it spread like wildfire. By the late 1500s, thousands had been executed. In Germany, in Scotland, in France, in Switzerland, some confessed under torture, others refused and were tortured anyway, all accused of things that once would have been called folk practices: charming a sick child with a rhyme, making a poultice from plants, marking a doorway with chalk. The line between healer and witch wasn't just thin, it was invisible. This wasn't about evidence, it was about control. Magic in the hands of the church or the crown was sacred, but magic in the hands of a peasant, that was a threat. It wasn't just women. Men were accused too, but in many regions, women made up 75% or more of the executed. Why? Because they were poor, because they were old, because they were midwives, because they were unmarried, because they were invisible, until someone pointed a finger. Imagine being taken from your home, dragged into a cell, told to name the devil who gave you your powers. If you cry, they say you're hiding guilt. If you scream, they say you're possessed. If you stay silent, they tighten the ropes. The trials were deeply flawed. Spectral evidence, I saw her in a dream, was accepted. Torture was routine. Confessions were extracted through pain or terror. But once the accusation landed, there was no escape. And worse, once one person confessed, they were forced to name others. Entire villages collapsed into chaos. Neighbors turned on neighbors. Families were destroyed by suspicion alone. Magic had become a contagion. Not something to study, but something to burn. Still, even during this time, people practiced. They passed charms quietly between generations. They planted herbs in secret. They whispered over wounds. They traced symbols in flour on the kitchen table. Magic survived because it was needed, not for power, but for comfort, for healing, for making sense of things the priests and kings couldn't explain. And that's why it was feared, because it worked in ways the church couldn't control. Meanwhile, the Protestant Reformation fractured Christendom. Catholics and Protestants accused each other of devilry. Old folk beliefs were outlawed or absorbed into doctrine. Astrology, alchemy, and mysticism were pushed to the edges. The Enlightenment approached, and with it a new language: science, empiricism, reason. Magic was about to be declared dead. But it never really died, just went deeper underground. And yet, the damage lingered. Tens of thousands dead. Entire cultures of herbalism, midwifery, and folk healing wiped from memory. What had once been sacred had been rewritten as satanic, and those who once shaped rituals became the villains in other people's books. But the old knowledge never disappeared completely. It waited in forests, in lullabies, in symbols scratched onto old barns, in stories told to children beside the hearth. Magic was no longer just a set of practices. It had become a resistance, a whisper that said, no matter what they burn, they can't burn the stars. As the Enlightenment swept across Europe, the world began to split. One world was bright, measured, logical, empirical, the age of microscopes and calculus, of Newton's laws and Darwin's evolution, but the other world remained in shadow. Because even as science lit the sky with reason, something ancient stirred beneath it, a hunger, a whisper, a question that logic couldn't quite silence. What else is out there? In the salons of Paris, the libraries of London, and the cafes of Vienna, people began to explore the forbidden again, not in secret anymore, but as students of the strange. This was the beginning of the occult revival. In the 18th century onward, old magical texts were rediscovered and reprinted. Hermeticism, Kabbalah, alchemy, once hidden in monasteries or private collections, were now studied by aristocrats and artists, poets and philosophers. Freemasons began invoking ancient Egypt in their rituals. Rosicrucians promised spiritual enlightenment through symbol and secrecy. Even scientists dabbled, convinced the old wisdoms hid real truths. It wasn't superstition anymore. It was esoteric study. One of the most important moments came in 1854, when a French writer named Eliphas Lévy published Dogma and Ritual of High Magic. He was the first to draw the now iconic image of Baphomet, a goat-headed figure representing balance between light and dark, male and female, spirit and matter. His ideas weren't dark, they were mystical, symbolic, a philosophy racked in ritual. Lévy helped redefine magic not as a force to control nature, but as a path to inner transformation. Then came Madame Blavatsky, co-founder of the Theosophical Society in 1875. She claimed to have traveled to Tibet, to have met hidden masters, to have learned the universal truths that united all world religions. Her books, The Secret Doctrine, Isis Unveiled, were dense, wild, cosmic. She mixed Eastern philosophy with Western mysticism. She believed in cycles of souls, hidden planets, and spiritual evolution, and people listened. Because she didn't just offer rituals, she offered meaning. In a world becoming increasingly mechanical, Theosophy said, no, there's still mystery. The late 1800s also saw the rise of organized magical orders, most famously the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn. It was part secret society, part spiritual university. Members learned astrology, tarot, Kabbalah, alchemy, and ceremonial magic. They meditated, invoked angels, summoned visions, and they wrote it all down. because here was the return of something old. Magic as system, magic as path, magic as discipline. The Golden Dawn trained some of the most famous occultists of the 20th century, including the man who would become both infamous and legendary, Aleister Crowley. He called himself the Great Beast, wrote books with names like Magic in Theory and Practice and the Book of the Law. He claimed to channel spirits, took peyote, invoked Egyptian gods, and proclaimed a new era of personal will. Do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law. Crowley was messy, ego-driven, but also brilliant. He believed magic was a tool for unlocking the full self, not just to affect the world, but to transform your own consciousness. That idea stuck, and it would echo across the next century in strange, surprising ways. Because what began with secret societies and dusty grimoires was about to go public. Magic was coming back, not through temples, but through culture, through novels, through symbols, through decks of cards and television screens. The world was modern now, but the old questions hadn't gone away. They had simply learned how to change shape. The 20th century began with telegraphs and steam. It ended with satellites and the internet. An entire world wrapped in cables, screens, and science. It just put on a new mask. Because even in a modern world, maybe especially in a modern world, we still wanted wonder. Magic in the 20th century became fractured, but also democratized. No longer the domain of secret societies or ancient priests, magic could now be practiced by anyone. You could find it in an occult bookshop in San Francisco, a deck of tarot cards in a friend's backpack, an old VHS tape explaining how to invoke your guardian angel. The barriers lowered. The aesthetics expanded. Magic wasn't one tradition. It was collage. In the 1950s, a man named Gerald Gardner founded a new religion, Wicca. He claimed it was a survival of pre-Christian European witchcraft. Others disputed that, said he was reconstructing, not reviving. But it didn't matter, because for the first time in centuries, people could say, "I'm a witch," and not be burned for it. Wicca taught that the divine could be male and female, that the earth was sacred, that magic was real, and most importantly, that it was personal. Witches cast circles, chanted under full moons, honored seasons, wrote their own spells in spiral notebooks. Magic had returned to the home. And as the 20th century rolled on, magic began appearing where no one expected. In literature, in rock lyrics, in movie screens flickering with wands, vampires, ancient texts. In 1954, The Lord of the Rings brought elves, wizards, and forgotten kings to a post-war world. In 1967, Aleister Crowley appeared on the cover of a Beatles album. In 1971, Dungeons & Dragons transformed magic into play, turning spells into numbers, rituals into dice rolls. The Arcane was now a game, and millions wanted to play. The line between fiction and belief blurred. Suddenly magic was everywhere. In cyberpunk novels, in goth clubs, in the stickers on a teenager's laptop, in the way someone said, "Mercury's in retrograde," and meant it, half joking, half serious. And then came Harry Potter. 7 books, billions of readers, a boy with a scar, an owl, a wand. You can debate the quality, the legacy, the politics, But you can't debate the impact, because suddenly everyone knew the shape of magic again. Old archetypes, repackaged for a new century. And with it came a new generation who didn't just read stories, they acted them out. Online forums full of magical journals, fan-made grimoires, cosplayers chanting Latin in candlelit hotel ballrooms. The old rites weren't forgotten. They were reborn. To light a candle on a hard day, to shuffle a deck and ask the universe a question, to wear a crystal and pretend, just for a moment, that it's more than a rock. Is that delusion? Or is it survival? Because in a world of noise, despair, and neon speed, maybe magic is the quiet ritual that says, you still have power. Not over nature, not over others, but over meaning. After all this, after 1,000 years of stories, spells, fear, wonder, magic is still here. Not because it defies science, but because it's human. Magic is just another word for how we reach across the dark, trying to make sense of pain, joy, mystery, trying to connect. I believe in God. I'm a Christian. But I don't see that as a contradiction, because long before theology, before doctrine, there was awe, and awe belongs to everyone. You don't need to believe in crystals or ancient spells to know that lighting a candle when you're grieving helps. You don't need a ritual to know that prayer brings peace. You don't need a grimoire to believe that words carry weight. So keep your books, keep your stories, keep your symbols, but also keep your faith. Thanks for listening. Sleep well.